Welcome to this introduction course on juice HACCP, hazard analysis and critical control point for juice products.
Juice HACCP, curriculum developed by the Juice HACCP Alliance, presented by David Rawson, lead trainer of the International HACCP Alliance, recognized by the FDA. Introduction to HACCP. Objectives. In this module, you will learn the meaning of HACCP, the origins of HACCP, the 7 HACCP principles, the 8 key sanitation points, and what are GMPs. Well, what is HACCP? HACCP is an acronym that stands for Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Point. But what is it? It's a food safety management system. What is food safety? Food safety refers to the identification and prevention strategies taken to properly handle, cook, and preserve food in order to protect the public from illness, injury, or worst case scenario, death. HACCP emphasizes process controls. HACCP concentrates on points in the process that are critical to the safety of the product. HACCP stresses communication between the regulator and industry. HACCP was pioneered in the 1960s by the Pillsbury Company working with the United States Army and NASA. It was first used for foods sent into space. Adopted by many food processors in the early 70s and used by the FDA on early inspections of processing facilities, it wasn't mandated until the mid-90s. HACCP is not a zero-risk system. HACCP is designed to minimize the risk of food safety hazards. HACCP is not about quality. If we keep products safe, we will preserve the quality. Around 1985, the National Academy of Sciences made a formal recommendation to food processors. Food processors were advised to adopt the HACCP approach as a way of keeping food safe. Around that time, science had really passed up the food industry and had the ability to identify and prove where certain biological contaminants were coming from. Another acronym for you. National Academy of Sciences recommendations led to the formation of the National Advisory Committee on Microbiological Criteria for Foods. The National Advisory Committee came out with a formal statement. It is responsibility of the food industry to develop and implement HACCP plans and for regulatory agencies to facilitate the process. HACCP is based on 7 principles, a formula, a step-by-step process. The first thing you do is conduct a hazard analysis. Second thing, determine the critical control points, or CCPs. Third thing, establish critical limits. Fourth thing, establish monitoring procedures. Fifth thing, establish corrective actions. Sixth thing, establish verification procedures. And last but not least, establish record keeping and documentation procedures. Principle number 1, conduct a hazard analysis. Each processor shall develop or have developed for it a written hazard analysis. Number 1, to determine whether there are hazards reasonably likely to occur for each type of juice produced, considering hazards with the ingredients and hazards with the process. And secondly, identify control measures the processor can apply to control the identified hazards. Principle number 2, Determine the critical control points, CCPs. Every point is a control point, or CP, but a point, step, or procedure in a food process at which a control measure can be applied, at which control is essential to reduce an identified food hazard to an acceptable level, is a CCP. Will this step protect the customer? Principle number 3, establish critical limits. A critical limit represents the boundaries that are used by a processor to ensure the safe production of food. Are you in control or are you out of control? Principle number 4, critical control point monitoring. A planned sequence of observations or measurements to assess whether a CCP is under control and to produce an accurate record for later use and verification. Principle number 5, establish corrective actions. The Juice HACCP regulation requires that a corrective action takes place whenever a critical limit is not met at a CCP. Principle number 6, establish verification procedures. Is what we are doing good enough? How do we know? Principle number 7, establish record keeping and documentation procedures. If you don't have a record, then it probably didn't happen. Each of these HACCP principles has a dedicated lecture. We'll cover them in detail. HACCP has been endorsed worldwide by organizations such as Codex Alimentarius, a commission of the United Nations, the European Union, and by several other countries like Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and Japan. HACCP is a preventive system for ensuring food safety, but is not a standalone system. HACCP must be based upon key prerequisite programs such as GMPs and SSOPs. They're your foundation. As we move to finish up Module 1 of the Juice HACCP training, it's very important that I introduce you to a key concept for future modules, the 8 key sanitation points. There are 8 elements that a juice processor must manage, monitor, and correct at frequency sufficient for control. Number 1 is safety of water. Number 2 is the condition and cleanliness of food contact surfaces. Number 3 is the prevention of cross-contamination and cross-contact, the transfer of allergens. Number 4, the maintenance of hand washing, hand sanitizing, and toilet facilities. Number 5, the protection from adulterants. And number 6, labeling, storage, and proper use of toxic compounds. Number 7, employee health conditions. And number 8, exclusion of pest. We'll be covering these in more detail in Module 2. What are GMPs? GMPs define the measures used to keep food sanitary and defines general hygiene measures. The current Good Manufacturing Practices regulation is 21 CFR Part 117, Subpart B. These practices are to ensure the safe and sanitary handling of foods and can be applied to any food industry. What's a SSOP? An SSOP or SSOPs are Sanitation Standard Operating Procedures. They describe particular procedures used to accomplish sanitary food handling and general hygiene practices. Monitoring and corrective action records are required. This concludes Chapter 1. Please complete the following quiz. You must achieve 75% to go on to the next chapter. Review all attachments for this chapter. And feel free to email me if if you have any questions or comments at david@123foodhandler.com.